The dry wind of the plains carried more than dust. That day, it carried the weight of words that would change a young woman's life forever. Clara stood with her arms wrapped around herself, the morning sun harsh on her face, but the sting in her chest burned far deeper. She had always known her father's heart was a stone, but never had she expected him to carve his coldness into words sharp enough to scar. "You've been nothing but a burden since the day you were born," he said, his voice as rough as the boots he stomped around in. Clara didn't cry, not there, not in front of him. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction, but inside her spirit trembled. Every daughter longs for a father's protection, a father's pride, and in place of both she had received rejection. Her mother had passed years ago, leaving only Clara to manage the chores. Cook the meals, tend the hens, mend the clothes. Still, it was never enough for the man who only saw her as an extra mouth to feed, not the hands that kept the roof over his head from collapsing. That morning, Clara decided she would not plead. If he saw her as a burden, then she would take her burden and carry it far away from him. She packed what little she had, an old shawl, a tin comb, a faded Bible, and the small wooden horse her mother had once carved for her. With no one watching, she stepped off the porch that had never felt like home and began to walk. The prairie stretched wide, endless golden grass waving as though it mocked her small figure disappearing into it. She had no map, no plan, but she carried something stronger than either, an ember of quiet hope that somewhere out there, someone might see her differently. Someone might see her worth. The sun climbed higher, and by noon her feet ached. Clara pushed forward, though her throat was parched and her heart pounded with fear. Coyotes sometimes roamed the edges of the land, and snakes hid in the tall grass. But she whispered her mother's lullabies to herself and pressed on. As she neared a narrow creek, the sound of horses' hooves made her freeze. Dust swirled, and soon she saw a rider approach, a tall man with broad shoulders, his hat pulled low against the glare. His horse was a magnificent bay, its coat gleaming with strength. Clara's breath caught, torn between fear of a stranger and the faintest flicker of safety. The man slowed as he reached her, his eyes narrowing not in suspicion but in concern. "Miss, you look like you've been walking a long way. Do you need help?" For a moment Clara couldn't answer. She was not used to kindness in a man's tone, but the dryness of her throat and the honesty in his eyes loosened her fear. I just needed to leave," she whispered, clutching her shawl. He tilted his head, studying her with a gentleness she did not expect. "Name's Daniel Hayes," he said. "I own a ranch just west of here. It ain't much, but it's home. If you've got nowhere to go, you can rest a while." His words carried no pressure, no hidden edge, only an open hand. Clara hesitated, thinking of her father's voice still echoing in her ears. Burden. But Daniel's eyes said something else, belonging. Daniel dismounted and held the reins as he offered her his canteen. Clara sipped, the cool water easing her throat, and for the first time that day she felt something unclench inside her chest. "Thank you," she murmured. He gave a small smile, one that lit the rough plains of his sunburnt face. "No thanks needed. Just come along. Ain't safe for a girl to wander the prairie alone." She nodded, and together they walked, his horse steady by his side, Clara's steps slowly gaining strength with his quiet presence beside her. The Hayes Ranch came into view by late afternoon, a wide stretch of land fenced against the wild, dotted with cattle and shaded by an old oak tree. The farmhouse was simple but warm, smoke rising from the chimney, dogs barking happily as they approached. Daniel introduced her to his hired hands, men who nodded with respect before going about their work. "You'll be safe here," he told her, and those words wrapped around Clara like the blanket she had never been given in her own home. That evening, sitting at the wooden table as Daniel served her a plate of stew, Clara felt tears sting her eyes. He noticed and leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "What's on your heart?" She swallowed hard, then let the words slip out, ragged but true. "My father said I was a burden, that he wished I wasn't there." Silence stretched heavy and raw. Then Daniel reached across the table and covered her trembling hand with his calloused one. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a promise. "Then he's a fool, because anyone who can't see the light you carry doesn't deserve you. And if he says you're a burden, then you belong with me forever, because I'll never call you that." The words struck her deeper than any wound her father's cruelty had left. Tears spilled freely now. But these were not tears of shame, they were tears of being seen. Daniel didn't look away. didn't flinch from her brokenness. Instead, he stayed steady, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles, his gaze firm as though sealing a vow. In that moment, Clara knew that whatever tomorrow held, she had found something her heart had never dared to believe in, a place where she wasn't too much or too little, a place she was wanted. The ranch became her world in the weeks that followed. She learned to tend the garden, to help with the cattle, to ride horses with laughter instead of fear. The men on the ranch respected her, but it was Daniel's quiet watchfulness that anchored her days. He never tried to fill her silence with empty words. Instead, he gave her space, time, and dignity. Each sunrise felt like a new beginning. Each sunset a gentle reminder that she was safe. For the first time, Clara began to dream not of escape but of a future, and deep in her heart she held Daniel's whispered words close, letting them root where pain had once lived. Then she belongs with me forever. And maybe, just maybe, she finally believed it. The days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel like more than a refuge for Clara. It became the home she had never known. Each morning she rose before the sun, tying her hair back with a simple ribbon Daniel had once handed her, and stepped out into the cool dawn air where the smell of fresh hay and leather greeted her. The men at the ranch, who at first had treated her with polite distance, now greeted her warmly, some even teasing her lightly as if she were family. But it wasn't their kindness alone that made her heart stir. It was the steady presence of Daniel, always near enough to give her strength, yet never pushing beyond what her tender spirit could bear. He was different from any man she had known. Where her father's voice had been harsh and condemning, Daniel's was patient, low, and full of respect. He taught her things gently, never laughing at her mistakes, only guiding her hands until she learned. When she struggled to hold the reins of a spirited mare one afternoon, he had chuckled softly and stepped behind her, his strong hands closing over hers. "Don't fight her spirit," he whispered. "Feel it, trust her. Horses don't obey force, they follow trust." And just like the horse, Clara found herself learning to trust again, step by step. But shadows have a way of creeping into even the brightest places, and Clara's past had not forgotten her. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the sky glowed in pinks and golds, Daniel returned from town with his jaw set and his hat pulled low. Clara sensed the heaviness in him before he even spoke. "Your father was in town today," he said quietly, sitting down at the wooden table where Clara had just set out fresh cornbread. Her hands stilled, her heart pounding at the mention of the man who had cast her aside. Daniel's gaze softened, but his voice carried truth. "He was asking after you. Said you ran off. Said you were making a fool of him. He called you a burden again in front of a crowd." Clara felt the familiar sting in her chest, but this time tears did not fall. Instead, she clenched her jaw, straightening her shoulders. "I am not his burden anymore," she said firmly, surprising even herself with the strength in her tone. Daniel's eyes warmed and a slow smile curved his lips. "No, you're not. And you'll never be again. Not as long as I've got breath in me." The days that followed brought both trials and blessings. Clara proved herself capable of more than even she believed. She mended fences, learned to milk cows, and discovered a love for baking, bread that filled the ranch house with a warmth she hadn't felt since her mother's kitchen. But she also bore the weight of her father's shadow. For rumors traveled fast in small towns, and whispers followed her name. Some folks muttered that she was nothing more than a girl who'd been cast out, too weak to make it alone, now leaning on the charity of a rancher. Clara heard the whispers when she went to town with Daniel, her cheeks burning with shame, but Daniel never let her shrink back. One day when a shopkeeper gave her a pitying look and muttered something about taking in strays, Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "She's not a stray. She's mine. And anyone who can't see her worth ain't worth our time." His words silenced the room, and Clara, though trembling inside, felt taller than she ever had before. One night, under the vast blanket of stars, Clara sat on the porch with Daniel. The cicadas sang their chorus, and the air smelled faintly of sage. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you help me that day, Daniel? You didn't even know me." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the sky as if he were drawing strength from the constellations themselves. "Because I saw something in your eyes," he said slowly. "Something I know too well. Pain, loneliness. I lost my parents young. Folks took me in, but I always felt like I was too much trouble. never truly wanted. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd be the man who gave someone what I never had. A place where they're wanted, no matter what. When I saw you on that road, Clara, I knew. You weren't a burden. You were someone waiting to be chosen. And I wanted to be the one who chose you. Her breath caught at his confession, her chest aching in the most beautiful way. Tears filled her eyes, but these were not the tears of pain she had known. All her life they were tears of gratitude. "Daniel," she whispered, her hand trembling as it reached for his. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before." He turned to her then, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made the world fall away. "Then hear it now and hear it for the rest of your life," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You belong. You're not too much, you're not too little. You're everything, and as long as I'm here, you'll never feel unwanted again. If your father called you a burden, then he gave me the greatest gift because now I can spend my life proving him wrong." The months rolled on, and with them came harvest, long days of labor, and quiet nights of laughter. Clara's heart healed in ways she never thought possible. The ranchers teased her affectionately, calling her the boss's shadow, for wherever Daniel went, she was not far behind. Yet it was not dependency that kept her near him. It was choice, and love, and the safety of a bond that only grew deeper. Clara still carried scars, but Daniel never asked her to hide them. Instead, he kissed them with kindness, speaking life into places that had once only known death. Slowly, Clara began to see herself not as the burden her father had named her, but as the blessing Daniel had claimed her to be. And when she smiled, the whole ranch seemed to brighten with her. But life is never without storms. One crisp,